All right, we're in business. Um, so we have a great session planned today. Michael is gonna have the pleasure of sharing with all of us, and we'll have the pleasure of having him present the topic closing the test automation gap, a guide to increasing your velocity. And we'll also have our very own Lynda Kane talking about the return of H.O.T in Cleveland, hot in Cleveland. All this session today is going to be around testing, as you can see. Um, this is our first time using Bevy. Hope everything goes smoothly. We're used to using Zoom, but we hope everything is gonna go well. And we have Provar Testing as our as a sponsors of this event. They got Michael to speak, and they have some Slack and certification vouchers and some other digital coupons to raffle during the session. We are your host, Orlando Riseño and Lynda Kane. We're the co-leads of the Cleveland Salesforce Developer Group. And with that, we're going to introduce our speaker, Michael Dailey. He's the Director of Solution Engineering and in Provar. He is very much into DevOps and barbecue, although he didn't want the chili cook-off at Provar today. He's from Nashville and enjoys spending time with his two dogs, playing Jenga, and all things barbecue. Please welcome Michael. And with that, over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Orlando, for that brilliant introduction. I will begin to share my screen now. And I appreciate you all taking the time to have me on and also just to be in attendance. Definitely couldn't do this without you guys, so appreciate you for putting this on. So I'm going to be talking about how we can close the test automation gap, and I'll kind of define what that is, and I'll give you a guide to increase your velocity, which is just fancy words. But really what we're talking about is how we can do things faster, because that's what we all want to do. Be able to develop faster, release code faster, test things faster, all of that. So automation can help us get there. So I'll be talking through some of that. But before I get into kind of the nitty gritty, I do have a few slides that I'll go through, not from a pitch perspective, but really just to kind of stage what I'm going to be talking about. And then I'll have a brief demo at the end to kind of go through a scenario, because I think it kind of hits home whenever you see it in action. As Orlando said, I'm the Director of Solution Engineering here at Provar. I've been in the DevOps space for over 5 years now, kind of started out as a developer, software engineer, and I kind of delved into a little bit of test automation using Selenium, open frameworks, and that kind of thing. And then that's when I really discovered Provar, and my love for automation and testing just grew from there. And here I am today. As he said, I have 2 dogs that they keep me busy, and I also have a 6-month-old baby boy who I love to death. And I also have my wife along with me here, and we like to travel. And as Tristan says, I like to play Jenga. That's kind of his little note there, because that's an inside joke, but we won't get into that. And I do love barbecue. So that's a little bit about myself. So I do want to talk about the agenda today and kind of what I'm going to be going over. First of all, I'll talk about what is Provar, this fancy weird word. What does it mean? I'll talk about some testing best practices and some kind of industry standards around that. And just the kind of the bullet point here is how test automation can increase the velocity. And then finally, I'll end up with a demo and some Q&A. And as I mentioned when we were all kind of joining in, I always like to throw in a meme or a quick little reference to any kind of my favorite childhood cartoons, Simpsons being one of them. So the thing here is that I know this is a developer group, and so I just want to say that I apologize if this sounds like a sales pitch. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be a technical session. So if you have this reaction that Grandpa Simpson does where he walks out, then I won't be offended. No offense will be taken. So I'll talk a little bit about what Provar is first. So Provar is two things. We have an automation solution, which is what I'll be showing a little bit later in the demo portion. And this is our bread and butter. This is how we got our name. This is where we started out. And then we have also the Provar Manager, which is the newly launched as of 2 months ago on the App Exchange. This is our test management / quality hub for Salesforce. And really what we mean by that is of course, it's a native Salesforce application. It's housed in the App Exchange. You can install it in any org that you choose. And then that's like kind of like your centralized repository for your test management, analytics, requirements, traceability, that kind of thing. And also for integrations. It's a hub for that as well. I won't be kind of getting into that. I just kind of wanted to mention it, but yeah, we'll be focusing on automation today as far as like what Provar is. We do test automation and we do it for Salesforce. Okay, so a little bit not related to Provar. So talking about some testing best practices. A lot of these will be familiar if you're familiar with testing, if you're familiar with test automation in general, QA, that kind of thing. But I think it always is good to have these as reminders and kind of like talk these out a little bit more. So in terms of how test automation begins, we always recommend that you start from a manual test script. So in other words, whenever you get an automation solution or wherever you start down your automation journey, a lot of times people don't know where to begin. They'll just kind of start building things, but they don't really have a template to follow. And that's when things can get out of scope pretty quickly. And then you lose your plumb line, you lose your source of truth and where it came from and where the test originated from. At the end of the day, we should be starting from a manual test scenario because otherwise there's not really any value in that. So every automated script, every automated test has to start from something that actually represents a real world scenario, a business scenario. So what the users are doing in the application on a day-to-day basis, what are the things that we're trying to test? So that's where automation begins. As far as what to include in that scope of all of your regression and what you're going to automate, it should always include positive and negative scenarios. And what we mean by that is not just the happy path, but also the unhappy path. So we all know what happens if all the data is entered incorrectly and every user does exactly what they're supposed to do. But unfortunately, as we all are aware, users don't always do what they're supposed to do. Sometimes they go off script. Sometimes they do things that are not part of the typical path. Those are the negative scenarios. You know, what if the data is incorrect? What if the validation error pops up on the screen? How do we handle that? So testing for those negative scenarios is very important as well from an automation perspective to get the bigger picture. Also, all tests should be documented and tracked over time in some kind of test management solution. I mentioned Provar Manager as one such test management solution, but there are many on the market today that you may be familiar with, such as Zephyr, X-Ray, Azure DevOps has one built into their tool as well. There's many different ways to do this. You can even use Excel or spreadsheets, that kind of thing. A lot of people, that's their starting point, right? They have their scenarios defined in some kind of format, whatever it is, wherever it's housed, as long as it's centralized and accessible to the right parties, and it can be updated, and you have versioning and history and that kind of thing. Ultimately, that's just, you need to have some kind of documentation hub for these test cases outside of the actual automation pieces. Also, regression testing is something that is kind of like thrown around quite a bit, but it's not always defined in what that means. Regression means you're testing something more than one time. Realistically, it means you're testing something that has already been tested, because testing a feature one time is not enough. As we all know, whenever we make changes to an application or updates or take things away, a lot of times things can break that were already working, where maybe we didn't even think that it was going to affect something that is no longer working. That's the purpose of a regression test. It's almost like a sanity check. You want to make sure that whatever was working before, exactly how it was working before, hasn't changed or is still working according to the requirements and the user stories that we worked on for this particular sprint cycle or regression cycle, or whatever the case may be. The other point here is another kind of a thing that has been very hot recently, and that's the shift left mentality. So that's really what we mean when we say shift left, is we mean test earlier on and test often. And we're talking about shifting left. We're saying that typically testing is done at the end of the cycle. So you have your different stages, your different environments, right, where the code kind of migrates to different orgs or different environments over time. And there should be, quality gates and checkpoints here and there. But unfortunately, it's not always the case, right? You don't always have time to do that for every single change that you make. But the thing is, if you test early and you test often, that actually saves you a lot of time down the road, because then you don't have to worry about things breaking as much, because you've already tested all of these rapidly changing features in a lower level environment, and you were able to resolve them there before they got propagated downstream. Because as we all know, we've seen that graph that talks about how much more expensive it is to fix something in production versus a lower level environment. So that's really what we're trying to accomplish there. Another thing here, you get a lot of people that look at metrics, and they look at how many test cases you have. How many test cases have you automated? How many test cases have you built? And that can't be the only way that you look at testing, right? You have to think about where's the risk in my application? What kind of features am I concerned about not working? When we think in terms of risk, you have to think of two primary things. You're thinking how often something is done, so the frequency, how often a user goes down a particular path or interacts with a specific workflow or scenario. And then you also think about the impact. So how much severity or how severe would it be if that particular feature or workflow were to not function properly? So that's really what we talk about risk. Those are the two main factors. So trying to assess the risk coverage is a much better metric rather than just looking at the overall test coverage, because test coverage only gives you one side of the story. It doesn't really tell you how the application is being used and how things are being affected. So I want to kind of segue from my talking here and just again, just like to throw in a little bit of humor. So this was a tweet from a while back, and I really like this. If you have a QA mindset or even an engineering mindset, you can probably appreciate this. A QA engineer walks into a bar, they order a beer, they order 0 beers, they order 99999 beers, a lizard, -1 beers, and whatever that is, right? But then the first real customer walks in and asks where the bathroom is, and then the bar bursts into flames, killing everyone. So the whole point of that little anecdote there is that you can't think of everything as as a person, as someone who's looking at an application and thinking about all the different edge cases, all the different exploratory paths that may be taken in your application. And sometimes you have to try to go down that road, but you can't always do that. You don't necessarily have time to do that. So really where automation can help is really just giving you more time to do those more exploratory testing paths, because you're not doing the same regression tests that you used to be doing from a manual perspective. Now you have more time to kind of do things that are a little bit more ad hoc, exploratory, and honestly way more interesting than the monotonous, repeated regression cycle. Hey, go and check this. I made a change to this. Hey, go and check this again. I made another change. You keep doing the same thing over and over again. So that's really what the purpose of automation is to reduce that monotony. That's really just kind of like from a personal perspective, right? But there's other points too. There's consistency in automation. If you automate something, the whole purpose of automation in general, forget testing, is to make sure that you have a repeatable process that you can execute over and over again. So that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about automation. We're talking about a process that can be executed every time you push a change into an environment. You want to run the same test case, the same parameters, and all those kinds of things. And really, a big thing here is accelerating the regression cycle. So we talk about how we can increase the velocity. Automation plays a big role in that. A lot of times we work with people where we're consulting, or we work with existing clients or prospects and those kinds of things, and they'll tell us that their typical regression cycle or sprint cycle takes, it takes 4 weeks, let's say, to get a line of code from a developer's environment into production. And they'll say that maybe 2 or 3 of those weeks, or maybe a week of that particular cycle, is dedicated just to the actual testing of that feature or that line of code or whatever the case may be. If we can reduce that time to, say, a day or even a few hours, then we've just got back all that free time, right? So when we talk about accelerating our regression cycle, that's really what we mean. Is we're cutting down on the manual time that it takes to test all the features and all the updates and all the changes that have been made each cycle. And of course, a big thing here is that it's fully autonomous. You can't realistically ask someone at midnight, hey, can you go test this real quick? I just made a change to it, because not everybody is up at 12 a.m. like developers, right? Not everyone. Some people have to sleep. I don't know why. I don't know what they're doing. They could be working, but anyway, the full autonomy is really important. So not having to worry about it, you can schedule it, you can run it overnight. That automation really comes into play there. Okay, enough talking and time for a demo. So I'm going to jump right into it. Okay, so what you're looking at here, before I just kind of jump in and start doing things, I want to explain what I'm doing and why I'm doing it and kind of the story that I'm going to be showcasing here. So first things first, this is of course my Salesforce org. I'm logged into a Scratch org, actually, that I'm going to be making a change to. I'm using the Dreamhouse application, which is on the Salesforce sample app gallery. So I've deployed that to my Scratch org, and I have basically, I'm going to be making a change to the broker object. I'm going to be modifying a field. But before I go through that, what I want to do is I want to build out a test case that tests the creation of a broker object with that field in mind. And then I want to make the change from it from the developer persona, and then run the same test case to showcase what just happened, right? So how can we, do this over and over again? All right, so first things first. So this is my Salesforce org, as I mentioned. On the right side, this is Provar Test Builder. So this is accessible through a Chrome extension that we have whenever we have installed Provar on our machine. And this is what allows us to interact with our Salesforce org in the UI and add our steps to our test case that we would normally be doing manually. So all the manual effort that you would be doing if you were creating a broker object or going through a particular flow, all of those can be added to a test case here. So I'm going to be constructing an automated test case. So the first things first, I'm going to navigate to the Brokers tab, and I'm going to right-click the New button here. So then I have the option to add this to my test case. So a couple of things that happen for me automatically is, number one, Provar detects that this is a Salesforce layout. And what that means is this is a standard layout. There's nothing special about this page. It tells me that there at the top. And it detects that it's on the broker homepage. Now, if this was a non-standard layout, like a Visual Force page or a Lightning Web Component or something to that effect, it would give me that information over here as well. So it kind of tells you what was used to build this particular page. So that's for the page structure. The other details are the field details themselves. So what field do I want to interact with on the page? Normally, what you would be doing in traditional automation, such as Selenium or open source frameworks, is you would be inspecting the HTML, right? You would right click on a particular element on the page, you'd go into inspect, and you'd look into the HTML and the DOM, and you try to find a unique way to identify those elements. So that way you could write code to automate, interacting with them. We don't have to worry about that. All of that is abstracted away because Provar utilizes the Salesforce metadata API to locate where the fields are dynamically. So if they change or if the label changes, which is what I'm going to be showcasing, then the same test case will still function properly. So that's the field details. The next thing is the interaction type. So how I'm actually interacting with this particular element. Again, all of this was automatically populated for me, just kind of detailing exactly what it did. The red indicator here just shows me what field on the page that I interacted with. So if I right clicked on the import button, we would see that field be highlighted there instead. Now, because this is a button, it detects that the interaction type should be defaulted to click. If it was a different element type, it may be defaulted to another interaction, but I can also change that after the fact if I don't want to use the default.
Michael, we have a couple of questions in the chat. One is if it's a browser extension.
Oh, sorry. So a bit of clarification. The Chrome extension launches alongside the desktop client. So it's not something that you can install separately. It is installed along with the desktop solution. So once you install Provar on your machine, the Chrome extension is enabled, so then you can run it from there. Hope that makes sense.
Interesting. Awesome. Thank you for that.
Yep.
And the other question is, what's the name of the test builder app? Well, that'd be Provar, right?
Yes. Yes. So this is the test builder application is part of the Provar solution in the desktop. So again, the extension is tied to the desktop piece. And I'm running it on a Windows machine right now, but it is cross-platform. I saw the question there on the Mac. It is Mac as well. So basically the way that it works, again, is I'm right-clicking on an element and then I click Add and Do. So what that does is that adds that step, that interaction to my test case. And we'll see here a couple of things are happening. It added a screen element there. So it tells me what screen it's going to be on, and then it also adds the step to click the new button. But not only am I adding the steps, it's also performing them in live time. This is actually a really good benefit and a fast way to automate things, because coming from a Selenium background myself, normally you'd have to code everything behind the scenes, compile it, start from the beginning in your debug mode, wait for the browser to open up, and then you're kind of getting to the point of failure and you're making a change, and then you have to do all over again. Being able to make changes on the fly and edit them in live time is very valuable. All right, so I'll go ahead and continue here. So I'm going to interact with a couple of more of these fields, like the broker name. And I'm going to be doing some set values here. So what I'm going to be doing specifically is using some variables that I've created for this test case to make things parameterized. So rather than using static data, like referring to a specific name here, I want to be able to run this through an automated process, right? I want to think about future iterations. So I don't want to create duplicate records. So I have a name variable here that utilizes a unique ID. So then I'll click add and do. So that's going to give me a unique broker name each time I run this test case. So that's setting the broker name field there. I'm going to go ahead and fill in a couple of other details. So I have one for the email as well. I'll fill in my phone. I'm also using a random number generator from the phone value, so that way that's different. And then I'll populate my title field as well. These particular variables I've created at the start of the test case, I could also populate them from an Excel file or a different data source if I wanted to. Is my screen not full screen? It isn't mine.
It is full screen.
Okay. Sorry if it's not visible. Yeah, I can make the browser a little bit bigger, I guess, if I do this. That's really all I can do. Maybe not that much. Maybe one less. How about that? Maybe that's a little better. And then the last field I want to add here is the status. So I'll go ahead and do that. All right, cool. So again, I'm just populating all my fields for my broker object. The status field here is very important, so pay attention to that one. So right now you see the label says status, and it's not a pick list. It's just a text box. The type of this particular field is just text. So I'm going to be changing this to not only be a pick list, but I'm also going to be changing the label for it. So two changes really that I'm making to it. Before I do that, I'm going to finish my test case. So I'll click the save button. And one thing that you can also do is take screenshots as you go along. So before and after all the steps, if you like, you can take screenshots. I like to do that sometimes, but not all the time. Like if I'm clicking a save button, it's probably a good time to take a screenshot, because then I love to see that toast message there. Okay, so that's creating something in the UI. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. The other piece that I want to kind of show is how we can interact with the APIs in Salesforce. So rather than having to write like a custom SQL query to verify all these different fields and the data is correct, I can interact directly with SQL within Provar. So what you're looking at now is the desktop client. So this is the actual desktop solution that launches Test Builder, which was what you were seeing here. So in my desktop client, I have what's called an org browser, which is basically just our metadata viewer, where you can see all the different objects, customer standard, and all those kinds of things, the fields and everything. So I'm going to filter on the broker here and look for that. So once I find the object that I want to interface with, I can do a couple things with it in here. I can kind of get a preview of some of the data. Apologies for the train if that's in the background. They like to go whenever I'm talking. And I can also filter on it. So if I want to look for a specific record by ID or something like that, and then if I double click on a record, it'll open up the detailed view here of all the different fields of that particular record. So again, it's just kind of a viewer for the data, a little preview there. But really the more useful side of this is that I can interact with these objects. If I left click and drag this into my test case, I have a dialog window that pops up here to create this object using, I can use standard CRUD permissions to create, read, update, and delete, or I can write a custom SOQL query. I'm just going to do a read assert. So what this does is it pops up all the fields for this particular object. And if my field list is particularly long, I can search for it. Or if you're like me, I am lazy. I like to make my life easier. So I'll go ahead and search for those. And what I'm doing is just searching for the fields that I want to read and validate. So just all the fields that I've populated here. So I'll go ahead and do that real quickly. And click OK. Okay, so what that's done, again, that's added a step to my test case to read the broker object from the Salesforce database that I'm connected to. And I have all these different assertions for these fields to validate them. But the first thing I need to do is specify an object ID or a record ID here. Rather than going into the UI and copying it from here, which I could easily do, right? I could do this, and this would work this time. But like I said, when you're thinking about automation, you're always thinking about how you can run it multiple times. So the next time I run this test case, this object ID is going to refer to the previous record and not the current one. So rather than do that, again, I want to use a variable. So I'm going to use my content assist little hotkey here, which is control space. And I'm going to look for this broker ID that I have created here. So this ID that pops up automatically. So what happens is in Provar, whenever you create records in the UI, it automatically creates that ID for you so you can access it. So I'm just going to save that real quickly. And then I want to go ahead and set all of my assertions. So I want to make sure the status is equal to status. I want to make sure the phone, as I read it from the database, is equal to the phone that I set it to in the UI. And I'm basically just doing the same thing for all these. I'm just validating that this record was created with all the correct data. And the email is the last one here. Okay, so I'll save that. So I've modified a test case here. I'm interfacing with the API. I see a question there, supports all metadata in Salesforce. Yes, so we use the metadata API, the layout API to interact with all the different metadata inside of Salesforce. So anything that has metadata for it, we have access to it here. Okay, so I added that step in the desktop client, and my test builder session is still actually active and running. So here I've added that step, and I just want to go ahead and resume and execute it to make sure I did that correctly. Ah, great. Love to see all the green. So everything worked correctly. I read the object from the database there, and it compared all the fields. All that's good. So I created my test case here in Provar. So I have an automated test case that I can execute over and over again. So now what I want to do, I want to shift gears really quickly, and I want to go to my Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to make a quick change. So I have a SFDX project on my my Visual Studio Code here, where I already have my change that I'm going to make. So this is the existing metadata XML for my status field. This is what it looks like. I'm going to be actually updating it here. So I've already made that change, so I can't make any flubs in a live audience. So I'm just going to save it here. All right, so what's going to happen now? I'm going to use my handy dandy extension to push this to my default Scratch org. So I'm already connected to my Scratch org, so I'm just going to push this change to the Scratch org. And you can see here in the change, the label is going to change to work status, and then I'm changing the type to a pick list with two different values there, unavailable and available. So I'll go ahead and push that. And as with every time I do something like this, I hope and pray that it doesn't break, and it looks like it all worked perfectly, which I love to see. So that should be pushed. All right, so then what do I do? So going back into Provar, whenever you make a change to the metadata, like I've done from behind the scenes, I've pushed it into this org that I'm testing. What I need to do is perform a quick refresh of the metadata. And the reason is the way that Provar interacts with the metadata and the APIs, it caches everything locally. So that way it's not constantly querying it every time you're doing interactions. So it's all cached locally. So then if I want to get an update, I need to do a quick refresh here. So I'm going to do a reload and refresh all of my changed files. And once this is done, I'll prove to you that this actually did what I said it's going to do. So once this is downloading here, if I look at my broker object and I look at the fields, and apologies if this is small, I can probably make it a little bit larger maybe. There we go. So if I look here, my status, and you go to the right here, this is the label for it. So it says work status. So it does look like my change has been pushed because I see that label has changed there. So now what I want to do is I want to actually run the same test case and not change it at all, right? So I've made a change from behind the scenes, and I'm just going to execute the same test case with no changes. So I'm going to toggle a quick breakpoint here just so we can confirm that field has indeed changed, because sometimes the UI doesn't immediately reflect those kinds of changes. So I just want to make sure that goes through. All right, so I'm launching Test Builder again, which is what this is doing. It's opening up my Salesforce browser, and it's opening up on my other tab here. So let me pull that over. And it's executing my test case that I just built out for you guys. So it's interacting with that. It's clicking the new button, and it's going to pause right here because I have a breakpoint toggled. So as soon as it gets to this step, it's paused now. And let me just make sure. Yeah, so if I look, this label has changed. So now it says work status, and then you can see that it's a pick list. Cool. So again, I'm not going to change anything in my test case, right? So I don't want to modify this at all. So if I'm just going to go ahead and resume this. And again, the reason that this is going to work is that it's all tied to the actual API name for the particular elements, right? So rather than using labels or something that's tied specifically to the DOM or the HTML, we're referring to the metadata API names for that particular element. So we could see the same test case pass there with absolutely no changes. So we were able to test that from a regression standpoint, even after we made that change. And just to kind of validate that again, what we're looking at here, if I look at my Visual Studio Code, magnify this a little bit, this is the API name, right? So this is ultimately what Provar is looking for whenever it's trying to recognize that element. If I were to change the API name, well, that would be a different story, but that's another conversation for another time. Hopefully you wouldn't be changing API names on the fly like that.
That's pretty awesome.
But let me go ahead and switch over back to my slides really quickly. And that I'll go a quick recap of what happened, although it's pretty simple flow, right? I just ran some test cases. Ran a test case against the Dreamhouse application. I deployed a simple change, changing a field to a pick list and changing the label. Then I ran that same automated regression test against there, and then we could see the changes were reflected. So there you go. So that's the end-to-end kind of the process of what that looks like. I know there were some questions as we go along, so if there's any more questions, I can take those now.
Yeah, the last question, it's from Zachary. How do these changes interact with validation rules?
Great question. And can you clarify for me, what do you mean by interact with validation rules? So are you trying to say that you have a test case that is validating a validation rule, like checking to make sure that it appears, or if a field is required or something like that? Or
I was talking more specifically about like when you were in the desktop application for it, those changes. You're not actually changing anything in Salesforce when you make those changes. It's just within the test case within your desktop application. Is that correct? Or are you making changes in Salesforce from there as well?
Well, when I switched over to Visual Studio Code, I actually did make a change to this Salesforce org. It's a Scratch org that I pushed a change to update this field. So I actually did make a change to the Salesforce org. What I didn't change was the test case. So what I was trying to illustrate was that the test case doesn't rely on the fact that I'm making changes from the developer's perspective, right? So there's no real dependency there. So I can make changes as a developer without having to worry about breaking my regression tests.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Along the lines of that deployment, Michael, I probably missed this. Is the Provar client connected to the org that it's testing? That's how it gets all the metadata?
Yes, yeah. So the connection that we make through Salesforce is, so as I go back to my desktop client here, there's a test step at the beginning of my test case, the Salesforce connection step, which is basically what is making that connection. So that connection is used to not only log me into Salesforce, but it's also used to perform software queries and API interactions on my behalf. And that connection is defined here. And this is my Scratch org actually that I'm using. So this is the connection details for the Scratch org that I'm connected to. So I'm just using a simple username and password authentication to log in here, but you could use OAuth or something like that if you have that set up.
We have some very interesting and deep questions in the chat. One from Brian about testing scheduled batch jobs, and since not everything is going to be displayed in the UI, and not exactly related, but also a tricky use case. How to test APIs using Postman?
Yeah, two great questions. So for the first question regarding batch jobs and UI interactions, so what I've kind of showcased was interfacing with the UI and then also the Salesforce APIs. But we also have like a litany of different quick test steps that you can drag and drop into your test case in this test palette here. And one of those is an Apex execute test step. So you can execute Apex code anonymously, just like you would in like the developer console in Salesforce. So if you want to execute or run a batch job, that's one such way that you could do that. As far as testing APIs that you're used to test using Postman. So yeah, we can connect to any API endpoint. It doesn't have to be Salesforce. You can create a connection to any REST or SOAP-based web service. We can create those connections inside of this test settings tab here. There's a host of different connection types. So you would collect using a generic web service, and then you would define like the URL, your credentials, any kind of custom headers that you have for that API and all that. Yeah, great questions though. Any other questions at this time?
I'll go ahead and unmute myself. I'm Andrew Cleveland. I'm surrounded by developers. I'm the only non-developer, so I'm learning as fast as I can. And Michael, you're impressive. My question, I was typing it out, but I'll just ask it. It's a softball question. As someone who does not know code and stuff like that, what's your advice as far as what to learn first between Java and Python and all these other types of coding? What's your insight on that? It's a softball question.
Oh, that's an interesting question. So I'm a little bit biased. I started my career in C, so I would typically recommend starting in some kind of object-oriented programming language, whether it be C++ or Java or something like that. Really, just to understand the basic concepts. From there, of course, there's loads of different languages, and they all have their pros and cons based on what your use case is. Apex is very similar to most object-oriented programming languages. So it's pretty easy to pick up. It's much simpler to learn, I believe, once you've understood Java. So if you can understand Java, you can definitely understand Apex.
Cool. Yeah,
absolutely. Another good question there. Use case calling second batch class from first batch class. Will this scenario work? So are you initiating the first one through Apex, and then the second one is being kicked off from there? Or do you want to execute them both independently? If it's the first one, then yeah, it would work.
No, I have a batch, the second batch class, which get called in the first batch class as finish method. So if that is the case, that is kind of a 2-3 chain of batch classes, will that
Mhm.
get executed?
Yeah, so I mean, you could execute them in sequence if you have multiple Apex execution steps in your test case, if you wanted to do it that way. So, or if you wanted to just execute the first one that then executes the second one in the finally block, then you could execute it that way as well. So I guess it just depends on your order of execution and how that will work ultimately.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Michael, would you be a fan of DevOps and all the talk about closing the gap and automating things? I'm assuming Provar can be called as part of a CI/CD pipeline.
Yes, my favorite question, and I'm glad you asked. Yeah, so yes, indeed. Yeah, so Provar has a command line interface as well that goes along with it. So once you create your test cases locally and check them into some version control, whether it be Git or whatnot, you can then pick it up from there from any CI tool. So we have an integration with things like GitHub Actions, Jenkins, a lot of Salesforce release management tools. So basically anything that you're using, we have support for.
Awesome. So if as part of the pipeline, a structure gets built, deploy happens there, Probar comes in, test, and if tests don't pass, it will be able to pass the output back from the command line interface of Probar to say like, oh, test didn't pass, don't continue.
Yeah, that's a good question. So it kind of depends on how you set it up. We give you the flexibility to handle it however you want, because not everyone wants to, perform actions conditionally based on the test cases that are running from an automated way in the command line. You may or may not want to, perform a deployment based on the test status or the regression test status. So, you could set that up definitely, because you can feed in the report and the test results into whatever pipeline you're using. A good example is Jenkins. I use that one a lot. And GitHub Actions, same thing. You can set up conditional steps in there in GitHub Actions to say if your run test cases section didn't pass, if all the test cases didn't pass, then don't continue or don't run this particular section, right? And the same thing like with Jenkins, you can do consecutive job executions that are conditioned based on the previous one passing, that kind of thing. So that's typically how it's done, is you would just parse the test result file or the output from the test cases, and then you would make a decision on how you want it to continue.
Totally. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Anybody else has questions for Michael? You can type them in the chat. You can unmute yourself and ask direct. No, yeah, I do hear a noise too.
Yeah, I hear it fizzing. I don't know if it's coming from my end or not, but yeah, I appreciate the time today, and definitely thank you guys for having us on.
Well,
Appreciate all the questions as well.
there's a Provar specific question. Cost of Provar for a basic subscription.
That's a great question, and I think let me throw in my my link quote, because the best answer is it depends. I'll throw in my LinkedIn. Yeah, we could definitely connect. Let me have it here, actually, a little bit.ly link. Let me copy that link here. There you go. And then there's my email as well. So if you want to connect, happy to always connect and happy to continue the conversation. But yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for having me again. Thanks for the questions. I guess at this point I'll hand it off.
Thank you so much, Michael. It was a great session, very insightful. Thank you for all your answers. And yeah, I'll take the screen and pass the mic to Tristan.
Oh my goodness. I just want to say I love this community. Lynda, Orlando, and to all of y'all, you're just absolutely amazing. This is so much fun. I also just love to give back to y'all in the community because y'all are staying up late in your part of the world. You're sharing knowledge with each other, asking great questions. If I could get a drum roll, y'all. Yes, drum roll. Yes. Oh, all right. So, giving a lot of gifts away, not just because I'm, we're feeling generous. So the first gift, y'all, we have 6 DoorDash gift cards valued at $25 US. If DoorDash is not available in your area, because this is now a global community with a base in Cleveland, right? If DoorDash is not available, that's fine. We'll send you an Amazon or Visa gift card. That's no probs, right? So the first thing I want to say, I'm going to drop your names for the $25 value DoorDash gift cards, or Visa or Amazon if not available. We have Brian, Chandrika, Guna Sundari, Haser, Zachary, and Barakota. Y'all have won a $25 DoorDash gift card again, or if not available in your area, no probs. Woo, round of applause. And I'm going to, yes, we love this. We take GDPR very seriously, y'all. So I'm dropping your first name only for this recording, but please, I'm going to drop information for how to redeem it in the chat below in a second. Now, for our second top prize, and this is a deluxe box, y'all, that I'm biased because I created it, but it is valued up to $100. It's got an incredible message on it. It's got a notebook. It's got a few other nice giveaways for you, but it also has a branded portable charger that I've had for years and lasts forever. So the winner of a deluxe Provar swag gift box valued at $100 is Balaji. So congratulations, friend. We appreciate you. Again, I'm going to share the redemption information. Oh, yes. We appreciate y'all. And then our number one prize, y'all, and this is valued at $200 certification voucher to use for whatever, continuous learning with Salesforce you want. The winner is, drum roll, one more drum roll. Big money. Oh. Yes. Kristen, you have won a $200 certification voucher for Salesforce and continuous learning. Major congratulations. I'm going to drop the information for how to redeem that right here. You can, and Micah is watching right now. It's her day off. And she's still here watching, but from her phone. Micah is incredible. She's on my Small But Mighty community team. You can email Micah Rose at emerson@provartesting.com, and go ahead and get your redemption for all of your prizes. But I just wanted to say just a little something from us at Provar to all of you. We adore you all in this community that you built, Lynda and Orlando. So I just want to say thank you. And to Michael, you're amazing. And I can't wait to watch your presentation too, Lynda.
Thank you so much, Tristan. Thank you so much, Michael. And I always call her Mika. She never corrected me, but no, thank you all so much.
It's our pleasure.
So with that, we're gonna continue, and we're gonna introduce Lynda Kane, the co-lead of the group. She's gonna keep her super famous talk of the Return of H.O.T in Cleveland. And follow her in Twitter. She's super active there, and in LinkedIn. She has 1 million badges, and if you join early, you saw how crafty she is. Right. With that, Lynda, you can take it away. I'll stop sharing.
Thanks, Orlando. So I will get sharing. The fun part, getting it all organized again. So today's topic is the return of H.O.T in Cleveland. This is a return because we did this presentation, I want to say like 4 years ago for our group. In person, though, not. You'll see lots of pictures, too. H.O.T means happy over testing or test classes. It really has nothing to do with the old show that was set in Cleveland. But, So little introduction to the topic before. And I will get into my own introduction. So, but we're going to start with a safe harbor, because what's a safe harbor statement? This is my personal safe harbor. So Apex testing tends to be a little, I may have taken some liberties in this presentation. I mean no offense to anybody, to any beliefs or anything else you have out there. I wanted to provide some entertainment. So, Apex testing. Some commitment. We can't deploy code to production unless we have code covered. You all grumble about it. I know I hear grumbles about it daily. But faced with this commandment, sometimes as developers, we struggle a little bit with it, especially when we're new to development. How do we get to that? How do we do that? We are often borrowing code that we see posted in different places, and sometimes those examples, especially the advice. But, we create our own code and test classes. We ponder, we stress. Eventually we get it. We try to get every line covered. But early on, okay, we achieved it. But then API version 24 came in. And I know you're thinking, we're on like 56 now. Just, step back in time a little bit with me. So API version 24 came out, and there was this command we all loved. Show all data. Nope. Can't. No more all data by default. You either have, we're a little shackled with that because we're supposed to already have our org to do our. Probably not a good idea to have done that anyway, but besides the point. So kind of we needed some help. We needed an oasis. We needed a plan. We needed a savior. We needed a spokesperson. We needed Betty, older than Moses White. But I'm sure many of you are aware Betty can't join us today. So instead you get me. So who I am. So experience in Salesforce, actually 14 now. I'm 11 times certified. I have over 1,800 Trailhead badges. I help run this group. I host Cleveland Salesforce Saturdays, and then I also run a Girls Who Code Club for Lakewood Public Library. But don't worry, I brought some helpers. I brought 2 tablets. The what I will call my tens of test classes. So thou shalt keep code current. Thou shalt honor the governor limits. Thou shalt include all inputs. Thou shalt test multiple times. Thou shalt confirm and exceptions. Thou shalt order results, and thou shalt comment. By no means is this all the things you can do. Just kind of think of it as a top 10. And of course, software development methodologies like TDD and tools that are out there like those provided by Provar to help us grow as their developers and learn that the focus really shouldn't be on that 75% coverage, but making sure we're doing the right things in our code and testing them. And then overall, my kind of like golden rule for everything test is to focus not on covering every line, but on testing the expected functionality. So test as you expect the code to treat your data. It's kind of a great way to approach this and more easily get to what you're doing. So make sure you're thinking and creating tests that receive it. Assert that the code's taking that data as you expected. That, just back to our table really quick. We've arrived at the promised land, the land of milk and honey, milk and cookies when we're good developers, where we have successful deployments, greater than 75% code coverage, proven tests, happy Salesforce admins and users. Hallelujah. And now we move on to what we're these testing best practices and resources. So I'm going to go through each. Orlando, feel free to pipe in with questions if any come up or discussion points. I don't know. It's fun to have discussion on some of this.
Absolutely.
So the first one.
The only thing, Linda, the baby alert of sharing it's showing. I don't know if you can hide it. Oh,
Yeah. Me. Yep.
you got it.
Okay. So I will say most of these come from Salesforce directly. So have not more than 3 API versions in code. Realistically, if you have a small code base, that's easy. When your code base, sometimes that's harder to manage. But try to use the most recent API versions you're able to and try to. So when you get time to do some technical debt removal, do it. I hear December is often good for that since lots of people disappear for the holidays, or at least, try to work less. But minor as of June, any API 30 or earlier is going to be retired. Make sure you don't have tests out there that have earlier versions. And just, remember testing code anything earlier than 23 had access to all data by default. Obviously, that'll go away. Earlier gone. Don't use it. Really, don't use it. Ever. Keep in mind that sometimes Apex commands do get retired, and newer APIs have some great new features, which we'll talk about a couple of them as we go on. So use original test data.
There's a question for you.
Yeah.
So Guna Sundari asked if code coverage is 75% for classes deployed to production, and there are cases where they have less than 75%, and they are still able to deploy. How is that possible?
75% overall code coverage for the entire org. And that is calculated by the number of and the number of lines that pass tests. So there's actually a calculation out there that happens, and you can actually see all that. There are some queries. I could probably share them at the end. I'll have to look them up. Again, I do have them stored because I look at them a lot. But you can actually deploy code with less than 75% coverage for an individual class. But your overall code needs to be at 75% or above for the org as a whole. The only exception to that, like if you try to deploy something at 0 coverage, if it's a trigger, it won't deploy. 100% code coverage to deploy. So, are we good to move on?
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. So, original test data. So, necessary data you need in your test classes, so that your tests don't have to rely on the data in the particular organization. You want to create all that test data before you run the start test method. And then since the tests don't commit, you don't have to worry about deleting the data. So you want that data you create to serve your users as much as you can. So you're going to create want to use like test setup where you can take advantage of creating a test factory class to help you generate that data. You can data in CSV resources and call them in your code to utilize as well. Just keep in mind though, when you do use CSV files, you're going to need to honoring the governor limits. Using start test and stop test really help you do this. So you can only use test start test and test stop test once. You start that, it restarts, and then after you stop it. So if you had to create code for your setup, you don't want those governor limits affecting when the test is run. Can't tell you how many SOCL query errors I've been seeing lately because I have some developers who have not always remembered. The other thing that's great about start test, you can test those asynchronous calls because once stop test is done, all those processes are executed and you get the results. So, you know, some of the times when you're doing testing. Inputs. So if your code includes conditional logic, execute each branch. So make the call to methods using both valid and invalid inputs. So I really recommend planning ahead, outline, try to get at least 85% of the different situations. And yes, test a situation where someone thinks they shouldn't be able to input. You know, that's going to help you, especially if you sometimes relax things to do bulkifying. No, you hear it a lot, but exercise that bulk figure, you know, try it. Salesforce is telling you to try at least 20 records. It's okay. Sometimes you need to test more, but test with multiple records. Remember, those IDs might not come in order. Start with more than just one of those resulting records when you do. You know you're going to have a bulk and you know you're going to have 200 and you know you've numbered them. Make sure you're checking more than one of them in your asserts so that the behavior is consistent. Context. If you have differing rights and users and you're definitely using the sharing settings and with sharing in your methods, make sure you're testing with some run as methods. You know, make sure that those profiles, those permission sets, and the users who should not be able to change data can't. That do can. You don't always want to test with system admin. System admin can modify all. So keep those things in mind. And if you're going to use without sharing, thoroughly test to make sure that's the stuff they really shouldn't have. So performing simulation. So using mocks and stubs where they make sense. So obviously REST subcalls to external systems or those coming into Salesforce, anything that uses other external data usage, website responses, simulating email sends. I can tell you it doesn't work for custom notifications. Tried a couple times. I wish there was a good way to test that, but you can test it, you just can't assert it. Just a little bit of topic so you can learn more. There is a whole page in the developer force, and this link will be available to you in the slides, which I will post out there. So confirm your expectations and your exceptions. The assert class, brand new, like what, 1 or 2 releases ago, you know, is used to prove that the code behaves properly. In the past, we had system.assert, but now there's actually its own assert class that you can use, which is pretty cool. So, you know, successfully make sure the code completes without throwing exceptions, you know, that you get that try catch block to use it. You're catching your, you're not just, you know, ignoring them. Really strive for that minimum 2 asserts per test method. If you're importing data, assert that that data imported correctly first. You know, make sure the data is there before you, you know, try to create methods that actually raise that exception as well. And of course, learn about system assert is not gone yet. If there's a timeline for removing it, I haven't heard anything. The checkers that are out there, if you're looking to publish something from the exchange, are starting to. So, order results. Don't assume IDs appear in sequential. Typically, they don't. So you might not get exactly what you wanted. Definitely use order when retrieving post-test data, especially if you're using limit, and try to order by those known fields. Don't order by the IDs, because again, when it creates records, it's going to maybe not the way you think. And comment. My favorite thing, commenting your code. So Salesforce recommends stating comments that state not only what is supposed to be tested, but the assumptions the tester made, expected outcome. Your future self. Include something so you know what you're testing. Class, note what test method provides at least most coverage, if not all, or what you use. When you class, you know what test class you also need to probably edit. Give yourself an idea of what you're testing. Was this the positive situation, the negative situation? Was it a bulkified situation? Any assumptions you made? Comment those assumptions. I did include some examples that I've used before when I've done boxes. They really can be above or below the class declaration. I like to put it right below it because there are some tools. You read that first line of your class and are looking for that at this test, or sometimes the public-private to help classify right off, and they tend not to go past that for the first couple lines of code. Like brief statement about what this class is for, by whom, what methods, space for an update log, so as it gets changed, and then what the test class is for it. For a test class, this is a test for what, who created it, what methods it includes, room for the up. Need a test, run your test often. So while you're developing, get that preview sandbox each quarterly release and rerun it. Yes, Salesforce runs a hammer test, but they do not run it for every. So know what's going to come and what you might need to look at and fix. You can do Apex classes or Apex test execution. You can run from the developer console. I got to take force.com ID out here, but SFDX has test stuff running. Tests versus this via the SOAP API is still also possible. Of course, tools like hopefully if you are using DevOps and some CI/CD into there that can run to choose or with a frequency you've chosen. And then places to learn more about testing in general. So the Apex Developers Guide, if you've never read this, it's probably a good idea. There are Trailhead modules specifically on testing. These are pretty, and then this is a site that talks about some of the different software methodologies that are out there. That is pretty much it. Available. I'm gonna figure out how I can stop sharing.
Yeah, since you hit the little bar.
So those slides also have some example classes. So I took Apex classes from various badges that are out there that don't have test classes, and challenge you to try to write test classes for some of those as practice, and then gave a solution, not the only be all solution, but a solution to those. So that'll be included. And I'll make sure they are listed on our page as well as in our and I do keep a web page where I post presentations, so it'll be there too, and I'll make sure I share it out when probably tomorrow. I'll send out an email to all the attendees and to all those that didn't actually show up to make it to join us with links to everything. So
Lynda, there's a question. It's about how IDs are generated. How does Salesforce capture the sequence of record ID? It depends on the org and servers. You know,
yeah,
I'm
and
not sure.
I don't know that they've shared a lot of that, but I mean, we know the typical, the first 3 characters represent the object.
Mhm.
After that, it's supposed to be a sequence. Is not the way I really think about or think through.
Yes, but Balaji, we don't know the internal specifics, but yeah, it's supposed to be guaranteed to be an universally unique identifier, and so a lot of things could be taken into consideration. I don't know, timestamps and whatnot to make it super unique. And like Lynda was saying, the first 3 characters are the object, and then there's the little thing about you can have 15 character and 18 character long IDs, and I'm guessing those character differences are like a what's the word for it? Like a sum check.
Well, no, they're for case sensitivity. The 3 were added because Excel can't deal with the difference.
Yeah, got it, Orlando. Because that was just a basic question. Like, multiple users are creating a record on a sequential basis. Maybe in a single org or maybe in a different org. So just wanted to know, because Lynda has mentioned Salesforce sequentially created the record. So just wanted to know whether it depends on the org or it depends on the server. But yeah, I can understand. Yeah.
And I don't know that because I can tell you, like, there have definitely been orgs I've been in where an ID is the same, like another org, obviously a different record. But I've also noticed over time, a single org and ID ever reused. So even if an ID was used as part of a test, that ID is never used again in that org.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Thanks, Lynda.
Anybody has any other questions for Lynda? Ask in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask your.
So we can just cover our announcements. So upcoming events that are New York World Tour is coming up December 8th. We only mention it because it's the closest like Salesforce, which really isn't, but it's like a 7 to 8 hour drive if you want to go there. They are broadcasting it supposedly on Salesforce Plus. I don't. Automation Dreaming is next week. So a really nice virtual by Mark Jones and Vicki Moritz Henry. Lots of flow, some marketing automation tools. Questions on flow should be good, should be fun. But that website will show you the schedule, and then it is actually being run out of Bevy. So I don't know how much I like the screen size on this, but we'll deal with it. Ask that we remind people that also on the 8th is Representation Matters. So sign up for that one. It is virtual. There's a virtual aspect of it, so you can attend that one. And really, so Orlando likes Cactus Force. I don't get to travel very much.
I do like Cactus Force a lot. It's from around where I'm from, so I take the opportunity to go visit family. But yeah, Michael reminded me of Cactus Force with his T-shirt, and they have early bird sale ending tomorrow with a discount. So if you're planning to go, or even if you were not, you can get a discount until tomorrow.
Yeah, they're asking if we can paste the links in the chat. And then the last thing is, if you're in the Cleveland area, we do have a Salesforce Saturday that happens. I got drafted last minute to be a Girl Scout camping mom, so I will not be there this weekend, but people might be. Anyway, we're currently meeting at Common Grounds in the Cam's Corner area, nice little coffee shop. If you do come, they are cash only if you want coffee, just so you're aware. But, you can show up, bring questions, get help with trailhead badges, certification study, whatever. I'm there most weeks. We will be moving to a virtual meeting January, you know, snow. What can I say? Plus, I did promise my daughter, who's been actually learning Salesforce, that we would try to create a role-playing game in Salesforce. So that will our virtual sessions is, but you know, learning things about custom objects, flow, and Experience Cloud all at the same time. So I hope you'll consider joining us. And I do post those at this Eventbrite link. Get them scheduled. So the virtual ones will be out there. They will be via Zoom. So outside, we just want to thank everyone for coming. Congratulations to the prize winners. Those were some really cool prizes.
Yeah, thank you all so much for joining. Thank you, Tristan, Michael, Mika, and all the Provar team.
Yeah, thanks for hosting us once again. This was great.